We have a comparatively smaller team, around 12 in size as of now, compared to, you're right, like more than 100,000 person organization. And we still have to focus on a lot of use cases across the enterprise, from supply to demand to finance, HR, so on and so forth. So it's been a very interesting journey building the team as well as deploying solutions at scale and being able to maintain it. We expect an exceptional level of ownership because we are a small team. We don't have plans like if we're handling or delivering 50 products today, tomorrow if we're going to go up to, let's say, 100 products, I'm not going to double the team size, right? So the idea then starts to become, as we hire, how do we ensure that we're hiring people with exceptional ownership and this kind of a mindset, right? We have seen deployment go from like 3 weeks initially when we started all the way to a couple of days now. So things that, so we right now have 15 odd accelerators across varied set of problem spaces. But ultimately, the idea is to continue churning out these Lego blocks, which can then be used to just put together to solve a particular problem, right? Not to say you will require customization now and then, but broadly, if you're looking at trying to get 80% of the way there, this becomes really helpful and it condenses the time you need.
Supported by Cubotica, helping enterprises move beyond AI pilots and into real execution. Hello and welcome to the Small Team, Big Scale podcast, the show we talk about how tiny teams with big ambitions are doing more with less, scaling smarter, not harder, and building big businesses with teams that you could fit around a dinner table or in a conference room. That's one of the things we've been talking about more. It's about the impact of small teams, even within large organizations that are really punching above their weight in this era of AI and automation. I'm your host, Ron Schmelzer, and on today's episode, we're talking with Shashank Kadetotad, who is the Global Senior Director of Enterprise Data Science and AI at Mars, about how a focused data science team is driving enterprise-wide AI transformation across a multi-billion-dollar privately held conglomerate with tens or hundreds of thousands of employees and lots of brands. So hi, Shashank. Thank you so much for joining us on the Small Team, Big Scale podcast.
Hi, Ron. Thanks so much for that introduction. Very accurate. Appreciate it.
Well, this has been great. And part of the reason why we connected was both of us were recently at the AI4 conference, which continues to grow at a remarkable scale. And I think one of the biggest things that we've been seeing, because I've been participating in AI4 for a little while, is here this year, and I was last year. Last year was like 8,000. This year is like 12,000. So it's pretty amazing how fast it's growing. But the big change, of course, is that AI is becoming a lot more real. People are putting a lot more actual real-world implementations into it, spending lots more real money now, let's be honest, and having to show some real results. So just by way of background for our listeners, Shashank is the Global Senior Director of Enterprise Data Science and AI at Mars Snacking, which is the privately held global conglomerate behind many iconic brands you probably know. Across the Mars brand, you might know about M&M, Snickers, Pedigree, and Ben's Original. And Mars as a whole generates over $50 billion in annual revenue across pet care, confectionery, and snacking, which is part of a recent acquisition. We may hear a little bit about that. But the data science and AI functions driving transformation across those businesses is really remarkably a very focused, specialized team. Not an army of thousands. And Shashank leads enterprise-wide data science and AI strategy at Mars Snacking, working across the diverse business units to employ AI-powered solutions that drive operational efficiency, product innovation, and revenue growth. He's an active participant in the AI leadership community. And what makes this conversation really relevant for our audience, because some of you might be thinking, wait, I'm running my own small team. It's in a completely different industry, or maybe I'm starting my own business. I have a small team. What makes this relevant is you should understand that the laws of leverage really apply here. The sheer scale of the organization relative to the size of the team that's driving AI outcomes inside of it, that's really the quintessential small team, big scale theory, a lean AI operation inside one of the world's largest privately held companies, accelerating outcomes that would traditionally require far more headcount. So Shashank, let's bring us into it. Tell us a little bit about your background and tell us about the operation and some of the things that you're trying to accomplish there.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for that, Ron. So just real quick, from a background perspective, as you mentioned, I lead the enterprise data science and AI team at Mars Snacking. I've been with Mars now for close to 4 years. Now, prior to Mars, I was with Walmart e-commerce, prior to which I was with a pure play analytics firm called Mu Sigma, which was very focused. I used to focus on a huge, large home improvement retailer. I won't name them. And then prior to which I was with Amazon. So the focus really prior to Mars has been on retail and e-commerce. So coming into a CPG firm has had its own challenges, but has also been very interesting. And from what we're really focused on is, like you rightly mentioned, it's to create impact, right? Especially when it comes to traditional data science or AI. AI has been hyped so much, right? Pretty much everyone within any org is talking about AI. So it's become a lot more about being able to, one, delineate where AI is useful versus not. Second is to kind of create frameworks where we can scale some of these decisions that we are making as a team. And then third is to kind of really be able to educate the organization. So we don't really become the bottleneck necessarily, right? So I think these three things have come together to help us kind of create impact at a larger scale than we have a comparatively smaller team, around 12 in size as of now, compared to, you're right, like more than 100,000 person organization. And we still have to focus on a lot of use cases across the enterprise, from supply to demand to finance, HR, so on and so forth. So it's been a very interesting journey building the team as well as deploying solutions at scale and being able to maintain them.
Yeah, that's really eye-opening. When you said 12, I was like, wow, because what you're saying is that the scope of problems you're trying to address within, you're almost like your internal startup within the organization, internal entrepreneurial endeavor, because you have customers within the Mars Snacking who are basically asking you, help me solve problems within, you mentioned supply, demand, finance, accounting. You're building these AI automation solutions across the whole organization, solving all of these needs, it sounds like, within that small group.
Yeah, exactly. I think while I make it sound like it's just this team that's responsible, it is a small team, but we try very hard not to be the bottleneck, right? And what I mean by that is, typically, if you look at a successful scaled solution, it is something that has had participants from across the board. So it really takes, I think, other than obviously the impetus to create and deliver, it really takes the organizational mindset to achieve a certain scale and adoption, right? Which I think has really, one, made our team very successful, but also we are not alone on this journey, right? So we have a lot of partnerships across the business, across the functions, across obviously executive sponsorship and leadership that really makes this a joint effort.
Yeah, it's remarkable how consistent that is with a lot of what we're seeing across many high leverage organizations, even small organizations. Some of our listeners on the podcast might know that we've interviewed Wade Foster, who's the CEO of Zapier. And Zapier is this company building, they're a technology software services company, but people are still surprised that they bootstrapped their way the whole there. They're still bootstrapped. They don't have a very large team. And part of it is that they had to learn that they had to harness the energy of others. So you might be thinking, what is the 12-person team at Mars share with that software startup? The answer is that, well, if you're trying to grow through scale, you don't have like hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to throw at it. One of the best ways to do it is to say, think of your team as maybe a broader extension of all the rest. Harness the energy of others is what we call one of the rules of scale next. And it sounds that's really working for you. The other thing you mentioned, I'd love to dive into it, is this idea of systematizing processes, because doing things over and over again, it's not really a good use of time. And when you're a small group, whether you're within a large organization or on your own, you have to really learn to master your time. So that was one of the implied things, is how are you starting to systematize things within your group to make them not only be able to deliver scalably, but to make them repeatable within the organization?
Right. So I can give an example, right? I think also I have an exceptional team, right? I've been lucky enough to hire most of them after I came in. And we really gel well as a group, right? Now, I have worked in larger constructs and larger teams in the past. And I think the defining factor, while you can get a lot done, but I think the ratio of effort to result is a lot higher, right? If it's a larger team, because I feel there's a tax um, to coordination, right? So you start working in less flexible manners. You start focusing a lot more on specialists on areas that don't really require specialists. Not saying that you don't require specialists at all, but I think they have their place, and as well as the ability to take a step back and look at things that can be modularized, can be repeated, right? Now, just an example, right? If you were to take the function out of it and look at the solution independently, you'll see that there are a lot of shared solutions across functions, right? Even if they are disparate. So even if I were to take something like supply and demand, right? An optimization algorithm can be used in both, and there are attribution problems across the board, right? So generically, those solutions you will create a optimization algorithm of sorts or an attribution algorithm of sorts that can be customized to certain functions or certain data points or certain problem sets. But broadly, that is what they are. So that's what we have kind of taken and run with. We call them accelerators. But the whole idea is, hey, if you're going to forecast, right, we want a standardized way of forecasting across the enterprise. So we have a forecasting accelerator that is a combination. It's an ensemble, a combination of different forecasting techniques that we keep updating. But pretty much any algorithm or any function that needs to forecast can now use this module to forecast, right, with minimal customization. So we have seen, just taking this example of forecasting, we have seen deployment go from like 3 weeks initially when we started all the way to a couple of days now. So things that, so we right now have 15 odd accelerators across a varied set of problem spaces. But ultimately, the idea is to continue churning out these Lego blocks, which can then be used to just put together to solve a particular problem, right? Not to say you will require customization now and then, but broadly, if you're looking at trying to get 80% of the way there, this becomes really helpful and it condenses the time you need.
Yeah, that's really very insightful. It's interesting how things just keep coming full cycle, because I remember back in my previous analyst days covering service-oriented architecture, if you remember that, web services, this whole idea of composable, that was all based on something else, web services, XML, right? And it was still wrapping in many ways just legacy code, right? But it's interesting, we're bringing this back to the idea of AI and automation, where it's like, well, it's the same idea. Why do the same work twice? Can we make things broadly reusable and composable? It's interesting. Maybe we should bring back a lot of those ideas of the service contract, if you remember that. But
I think,
go ahead. Yeah.
I was just saying, you're right. I think these things are coming full circle. In fact, in AI4, I remember talking to someone about skills and loops, right? And they're like, hey, this sounds like back in the day when we used to do cron jobs. And I was like, yeah, like there is. So I think by and large, some of these concepts are so strong that they definitely will come full circle and will be fully implementable, but obviously at a different scale, under different contexts. But those concepts still stand true. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think maybe this is a good area to dive a little bit into, because when we talk about growing with scale, we talk about technology leverage. Now, some of that technology leverage is AI, because AI is particularly powerful. It's available. Now you don't need to be a data scientist anymore to have to build models, although having that capability is a great capability if you can do that. But now you have a lot of choices. So you can do that, or you can do kind of more traditional automation, rules-based automation, process flows. I was just mentioning Zapier, for example, straight up, programmatic automations. And of course, we have just our legacy code. We have our existing SaaS systems. So how do you, this, maybe it makes things easier, but maybe it makes things more complicated, right? So how do you figure out when you're like, okay, we want to gain the most leverage here. We want to gain this reusability, this composability. When do you reach for like one kind of tool versus another kind of tool? Speaking broadly, the idea of technology and tool. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Uh, uh, the way we operate right now, right, is our focus is divided across a whole host of places, right? One, everyone with the advancement in AI, everyone expects the processing time or the creation time for products to come down significantly, and we have definitely seen that happen, right? Like we obviously leverage GitHub Copilot quite a bit. I know we spoke a little bit earlier about Cloud Code, like so. I think those elements have been really powerful. Now, I think some of the decisions where we have slowly started focusing on more has been more on the one governance side, second on what part of the decisioning or the cognition do we want to offload versus keep with a human, right? And then the third would be, as we kind of do this, uh, let's start looking at what we define as production ready versus not, right? Now, so I can talk a bit about all three. So to begin with, when I say production ready, you talked about, hey, anyone can build models now, right? Which is, so true, right? I think the accessibility has definitely shot up. But then I think it's a whole other ball game to productionalize a solution and to maintain it, and how scalable is that solution, right? And that, I think, at least so far, that comes from experience. So the question then becomes, how do we make that experience systemic in nature, so that someone who's not a data scientist or data engineer can still build a fairly productionalizable solution, right? And that's where we are focusing a lot more on playbooks and sessions with the broader organization, where we look at educating those folks who are at least technical bent of mind, right? And there's some people who are just not interested, which is fine. But those who really want to get their hands dirty and really focus on building things, you don't have to be a data scientist anymore to do it, right? Like, so that's where we have a lot of shadowing that happens as well. So we have these programs where people can enroll and shadow us as we build out products. We put out playbooks, then standards and guidelines for the broader organization. The second bit is, it's not just the creation or development of the product, but also, typically it used to be a very iterative process, which is defining what the product will look like, right? And I think that is where at least we have seen a huge amount of time save, right? With products, right? Like Figma and the like. I think now we rarely deal with documentation. It's become a lot more about, hey, this is the prototype, right? We straight away look at the prototype, talk prototype, and then the goal of the tech teams, the data scientists and data engineers, is to make the prototype scalable, reusable, and ultimately less effort in productionalizing it, right? Like it becomes the goal than starting from scratch. So a lot less gets lost in translation, right? So I would say these are the areas that we have focused on more and more.
Yeah, that's great. I'm thinking about how to generalize all that. I think governance obviously comes up a lot. And I think smaller organizations might think, well, why should I slow things? People think like, oh, I might slow things down or impose all these needless controls. But the answer is, if you don't want chaos to happen, I guess the easiest way to think about governance is, if you don't want chaos, you have to have a well set of understood and in practice rules that you actually use, right? And it sounds like that's part of what you're doing. And that's part because, one, you don't want dealing with a mess is usually much more complicated, much more expensive, much more time intensive than doing it right the first time. And if you're a small team, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be trying to do things right. But I think the other message that I heard from that is, by doing that, you're enabling other people from outside the organization to be able to more effectively use the tools you give them. One, one, it'll deliver things faster. It'll make make them happier, hopefully, but also because it lessens the load on you. It's like that you have to do. So you can say, here are the tools, here are the rules. Oh, I like that. I should use that. Here are the tools, here are the rules. Go out, use them, and then help us build these systems that work for you. And that's a great lesson I think others can learn from. Did I get that right, or was there
Oh,
more?
yeah, absolutely right. I think just a quick thing on the whole governance aspect. Now, governance, if you spoke to me even a couple of years back, right, I would thumb my nose at it, right? So, as a practitioner myself, governance has never been my favorite topic. But I think you slowly begin to realize that as you scale, the biggest enabler to scale is governance, right? Especially in this day and age, right? With governance, you avoid pitfalls like shadow IT. You avoid, issues with quality. You start getting things right the first time. You also focus. You also know what are the priorities you're focused on. Right now, considering we're a small team and we don't want to be the bottleneck, then the idea starts to become, oh, what are the problems we want to focus on? There's obviously high value, high impact, but there's also an element of interest, right? So how do we balance that out? And I think having governance around it really helps prioritize things for the team as well.
Yeah, this is great. So I'm digging into a little bit more about, what within your organization and how you're dealing with it. One of the things you talked a little bit about getting things to production, which is always hard. So it's one thing to like have a prototype or a proof of concept, another thing to get this into something that's being used every day for important things, right? So from your experience, like what are you seeing as some of the most common reasons why perhaps some of these projects may stall? The things that get in the way of going from your proof of concept or prototype to something that's really delivering value every day, and how have you solved that? I think you may have hinted a little bit about that earlier, but would love to get into that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting with especially with Gen AI, right? I think it's flipped the script a bit, right? If I were to look at traditional data science, I think pilots, if you get a pilot right, that was 70% of the effort, and then 30% of the effort would really go in how do we build it in a scalable manner now, and so pilot would be 70% effort, scaling it and productionalizing it would be 30. And I think with now some of the Gen AI applications, it's quite the opposite, right? Like pilots are so easy. You don't really even need to have a tech background to create good prototypes. But once you start talking about scaling and productionalizing them, that's where a lot of the effort comes in. And I think that is also where we spoke a bit about expertise, right? And I think this is one of the places where expertise really starts to play a role, at least in the beginning, until you can systemize it through playbooks and all of that, right? But essentially, that is where I think a lot of our focus has started to go. In fact, so if I were to kind of give an example, right? If we were to simple semantic search, or if I were to take some sort of like an agent that scrapes all our prices, let's say from an Amazon or a Walmart website, and comes back to us and gives us our current pricing. So the idea then is, okay, if I were to take those use cases, it works really well for that one particular use case, right? But then when I start thinking about scaling it across geographies, right? Let's say across the European Union, say LATAM, right? Asia. And then I start thinking about, okay, since this aspect is just about scraping prices, I also want to start looking at the SKUs. I also want to start looking at how the SKU pricing differentiates across my competitors, right? And all these deeper questions, very quickly you realize will require a whole new application, right? So the idea then is that's where you need to then understand when you are going for a pilot, it's not about just creating that one particular feature set, right? It starts to become about what are the broader set of questions we need to answer, that so that we can scale, just not for concurrency, just not to make sure that the availability is really high, but also these questions will lead to further questions down the line that we need to be able to ingest really quickly, right? And that's where that will again then define our data pipelines, all the data that we need, anything that needs to be enabled in future iterations, right? So it just becomes about how do you reduce the cost of iterations versus, you may very well end up building a single new tool every time, and then you suddenly have 5 6 tools
Right.
which all operate in a similar area, and then you'll have low adoption. People just stop using it, right?
Yeah.
So
this is a good opportunity to talk about our supporters here. And one of those supporters is Cubotica, who is helping enterprises move beyond AI pilots and into real execution. Through Cubi, its agentic AI platform, Cubotica brings together intelligent agents, automation, enterprise systems, and human oversight to transform complex workflows across industries, including healthcare, banking, insurance, and real estate. The goal is simple: to help teams do more, move faster, and scale smarter without adding unnecessary complexity. So if your organization is ready to turn agentic AI into measurable business outcomes, visit cubotica.com and see what's possible with Cubi. So you can find out more at cubotica.com. That's QBOTICA.com.
yeah.
That's really very insightful. I just had an interview when we were at Black Hat with Vera, the founders of MacPaw. And one of the powerful things she was talking about is that the challenge with AI is that it's getting harder and harder to say no, because AI makes it easier to, for example, if you're just doing regular prompting, and Vera Tkachenko, that's her last name, at MacPaw. And what she said was, the AI system is very happy to suggest, like, okay, you did this. Would you like to also do this? Or have you also thought about this? And the penalty for sort of that kind of iterative doing is lower than it used to be, right? And so what happens is that you get this feature creep crawl, and eventually what started out as something simple becomes much more complicated. That's a different thing you were talking about here, but because you're talking about, like, starting with some feature and then intentionally trying to broaden it. But at the same time, what happens is that people are starting to get used to this, right? So you have users who may not be application developers, they might not be data science. They'd be like, well, why, I could just prompt and say, let's add this, let's add this, let's add this. But the next thing you know, you get this uncontrollable sprawl, or to your point, many tools that are all doing similar things, the same things, overlapping things. And that becomes a nightmare in and of itself.
No, absolutely, right? I think honestly, that's one of the bigger issues for a small team, right? So, in fact, one of the first things that we did as we were forming the team was to rationalize our products, right? Because we very well, at least as an enterprise team, right, could see all the overlaps. And then we should spend time matching, results from one product with one data product with another, or one analytical tool with another, right? And that's a very interesting point. I think this is not a challenge we have solved yet. I imagine that's something which we are still kind of working through. Is essentially when we start chaining some of these products together, right? Like to your point, there is I think a tremendous gap between enterprise tools that are available to folks within the enterprise versus consumer AI, right? If lack of a better word. So essentially, what I can do out here on my home computer, right, is vastly more freeing, but also much more impactful than what I can do within my enterprise computer, just because of so many things. And I think that is going to become more and more an issue, because the expectations from our stakeholders and our users is the outside world, how they use AI, and they want that ease of use within their internal products as well, right? And then there's a whole communication gap as well, right? If I were to chain tool A and tool B under like some conversational layer, suddenly it's not just A plus B, right? There are these whole host of new questions that you can answer. So how do you communicate that to the user, right? So I think those are some of the interesting challenges we are beginning to see as a team as well. But coming back to the whole scale aspect, for sure, right? That becomes a big part.
Yeah. I'm actually kind of curious from your perspective because going to all these shows and conferences, I'm seeing so many tools now. And I'm wondering if it's becoming difficult to decide when do you use your existing solution set, which already has broad adoption, has already got all the approvals, is connected to all the data sources, all the stuff that you're supplying about why we can't just do some off-the-shelf consumer thing because it's not connected to all the tools. People don't have the use cases, may not be approved. But there's a lag there. It takes some time for these larger software companies to build that stuff. But now there's all these new tools that are more focused on particular tasks, or now just build it yourself, right? Because now the capabilities to do that too. So how do you decide between, it used to be build versus buy, but now it's like build, wait for the thing you have to build it yourself, get a point solution, but then the point solutions, things are moving so fast, they might disappear. So I think things are becoming a lot more difficult. I'm just curious as to your thinking about it.
Oh man, I think you've done a great job of describing, I think, my headspace, right? That's exactly right. I think the technology is so fast evolving that uh, I think the conversation, it's changed the conversation quite a bit, right? And my mindset included my team's mindset, I think the organization's mindset, right? One thing we know for a fact, so we have started going back to the basics a lot more, right? So, for example, we know things will change and they'll change and evolve rapidly, right? Uh, so, if we know that, then the question starts to become how do we build uh, products, solutions, point solutions, to your point, that are adaptable, right? I think uh, being adaptable or iterative has become that much more critical now than it was in the past, right? At least as a team, we focus on that very heavily. How easy is it going to be to iterate, right? So that is one bit. I think the second bit is to, as an enterprise team, while we do build, point solutions when absolutely necessary, but more often than not, we shy away from that and we focus more on creating a system that will enable uh, either other people to build point solutions that are maintainable or build extremely maintainable point solutions that can scale to other spaces or other problem sets, right? So there are instances where we just don't get into a solution simply because I think broadly we don't see it super applicable across either different functions or different areas, right? Now, obviously, there are exceptions to everything, including this, but broadly speaking, that is what we have started focusing on. And we tie everything very clearly to impact, value, ROI, right? So much more than we did, I would say, let's say, a year back, as you know, everyone was in the mode of pilots, everyone was in the mode of exploration. But now I think, the CFO comes knocking and wants to, hey, who's willing to sign and say that, hey, this is the value that's delivered. So I think that has really brought the focus onto these two aspects. One is tying everything very clearly to value. And secondly, how long will this value sustain, right? And can we build it in a way that we don't have to, one, either we make it very cheap to iterate, or two, we should be able to replace it quickly, right? So that's where principles like is the solution good enough? That's started being the approach instead of super precise solutions, right? Which can tend to be expensive, but do they really give you that increment, right? I would say that was a lot more common a couple of years back. I enjoyed doing that a lot, but then hey, if 80% accuracy is not going to change your decisions from a 90% accuracy, I'll do the 80% so that we can maintain it. It's easier to kind of keep going and it's easier to iterate as well. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, you might think I'm a small team within a large organization, but it's actually the same thing that we hear even from small organizations, which is build things that allow you to iterate quickly and then make sure that it's the kind of thing that you can sustain over time, because otherwise you grow and then you plateau. This is usually the usual problem. And you might be thinking, what does a small 12-person data science AI team within a company as big as Mars have in common with this 13-person startup organization that's growing to 6.5 million ARR? The answer is it's the same thing, because when you're trying to build a solution for customers, you want to grow as fast as possible and not get in your own way. And part of that is that if you especially if you're not trying to raise a lot of money and hire a lot of people, you have to make the most with what you have. And I think that's the great consistent theme we're seeing here. It doesn't really matter how big your team is and how much your budget is, because you said the whole thing about value, which is that you have to look at the value. Now you're being measured on value, which is great. It's the way it should always be. But I guess maybe in the crazy days of AI, it was being measured on token usage, I guess, or something. I don't know. It was being
something like that. Yeah.
it was just like, how fast can we go and make the headlines? I wasn't sure, but now it's back to brass tacks, which is making sure that whatever you do has long sustainable value. So let's get into the team stuff. So how are you thinking about your team? How are you thinking? You pulled together, it sounds like a great team. You all work well together, which is fantastic. And really want to understand more about how are you thinking about that team growth? How are you thinking about what you need to do in the team, what you do outside the team, and maybe what lessons do you think others can learn about building this highly effective small team within a large organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where I think experience has come real handy, right? Also, I think within Mars, we follow these 5 principles, one of which is freedom. And Mars, even though it's a very large organization, I think it's very entrepreneurial in nature, right? So you'll constantly have different teams, different tech teams, different functional business teams that are encouraged to kind of take an idea and run with it, right? So with that kind of a mindset, so this is the kind of mindset we typically look for. At least I look for one that uh, we expect an exceptional level of ownership because we are a small team. We don't have plans like if you're handling or delivering 50 products today, tomorrow, if you're going to go up to, let's say, 100 products, I'm not going to double the team size, right? So the idea then starts to become, as we hire, how do we ensure that we're hiring people with exceptional ownership and this kind of a mindset, right? Which is you should be able to kind of make the right calls on one, how you make those decisions of what products to scale, what not to scale. I think also something that has really been helpful is in pursuing of not just the team talent, but also, and obviously there is technology to augment it. It's also become about when to call a pilot off, right? Like I think that mindset is something that we as a team have adopted really well, and we are pushing it on the organization as well, which is you need to draw boundaries around your pilot, right? Beyond which then it starts to one, I understand a lot of excitement can create a lot of pilots, but also then it starts to become, hey, I have this pilot running for a year or 2 years, right? And then what's the value? You have tied up really good resources, good technical talent, and just something that is not going anywhere. So we established what we call our AI lab in 2022 or 23, I think, 2023 in Newark, right? We established it in the first 6 months of me joining. And the idea of the AI lab, it was the first of its kind in the company, was I think a couple of these things, right? One is to kind of signal to the organization that we have good technical talent and we wanted to use that to also attract good technical talent. The second bit was it was a safe space or is a safe space for people to come and experiment, right? So you have technical talent, non-technical talent that can come in there, come to the AI lab, interact with startups, interact with cutting edge technology, and also come up with their own ideas that they can implement and work on in that construct, right? Without fear of failure. But also they have to define failure if they want to use the construct of the AI lab, right? So that way, and that is something that has really helped us focus on very high impact, uh, as much as possible, successful projects, right? Because it's easy to go after an exciting project that could be lofty, ambitious, but also still be in the same space 1 year, 2 years later, right? And that was something we absolutely wanted to avoid. And it's something I think is that's more common in larger organizations than smaller. You hear that all the time. But as a small team, we just couldn't afford to do that. So, yeah.
You actually might be surprised. It's actually a big issue even in small companies. One of the biggest challenges, even for like the smallest of companies, if you're starting a new company, you're trying to test a bunch of ideas, and you have to make the judgment call at some point as to what you focus on. And ironically or interestingly enough, it's a much bigger problem within small organizations. And when you start even getting a little bit of success, you start getting this, oh, we have this product, it's doing great, but now you feel like, wait, we only have one thing that might be too risky. Then you start dividing your effort and your time into multiple projects. And that's actually a common failure reason why a lot of companies fail, because they diversify too early. They don't they don't focus on what's going well, or they don't realize how to iterate the thing without branching off into something completely different. It kills big companies. It kills small companies. It's interesting how common of a problem it is. And I love how you think about it. The AI lab sounds fantastic. It sounds like a great opportunity for people who want to explore ideas to do so, as you mentioned, in this environment of safety where they can feel free to do that, but within constraints, so that they're not just spinning their wheels and forever and not accomplishing anything. This does tie back to that value thing. And as I mentioned, it's interestingly how we're coming around to these ideas of what it means now to successfully scale and iterate in this era where tools are making it easier than ever to build. But
Yeah.
building isn't the end. Building is the beginning. So, or
Right.
somewhere in that process. Well, this is fantastic. Well, keeping an eye on their time here. Our fantastic guest has been amazing. I always have the same 3 questions we always ask at the end of all of our interviews, whether it's with the small team startup, with the large team organization, whether it's with organizations somewhere in the middle. I always ask these 3 questions because the answers are different. Although we're starting to get some of the same answers for some of these things, but that's okay. If maybe like hear different ways people are doing things. So first question I always ask is, what is one tool? So it's a tool question. What is maybe one tool or automation that you absolutely can't run your organization without? The one that gives you and your team the 10x leverage every single week?
Yeah, I think I imagine it's a very common answer, but I would say a lot of these coding tools are now super. They're really good, especially from an augmentation standpoint. But I'd probably twist your question a little bit here on and talk about one of the things that we are focused on is also agnosticity to cloud providers, right? And that's where I think some tools have been particularly helpful, because and right now there's a big debate around open source versus frontier models versus I think it really starts to become. I talked a bit about adaptability and evolution and how quickly things are changing. So one of the basic principles I think is this, right? Is to figure out how can we remain agnostic and keep a good number of choices constantly ahead of us versus getting tied down early,
Mhm.
because no one knows what the next forget like years, even 6 months are going to look like, right? And I think we don't want to be in the business of guessing and betting, right? So the idea then becomes what will allow us to continue to be adaptable and allow us to change as we feel necessary. And that's where I think tools that help us remain independent have become more and more critical, right, to the way we function. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. Stay vendor agnostic, stay flexible, stay agile.
Right.
Don't no, even though the vendors want you to do this, don't lock into their solution.
Don't lock in. Yeah.
Right. And I agree with that, especially as you're right. I think a lot of these new open models are particularly powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm using I'm using GLM, which is
Okay.
fantastic, and the Kimi models are very good. But even
These
I can
models
say,
are good.
what are they going to look a year from now? You're right. I have Who know? Nobody knows.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even the frontier model companies probably don't know. So the next question has to do with processes. Let's think about like methods, practices, processes, things you do. So what do you think for your team? Because it sounds team is really very effective and punching above your weight, which I love. So what do you think any other for people who are listening who want to build similarly high productivity teams, maybe what's one system or process that you think every lean leverage first team should have in place by the time they're delivering millions of dollars of revenue that separates the ones who are effectively scaling from the ones who are just grinding? The ones who's like, it took so much effort to deliver that first bunch of value, it's going to take twice as much effort to deliver the second batch of value. Maybe that's one thing you would tell them to stop doing that you found is not good to do, or maybe something that they should start doing today.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is, and I spoke a bit about this, but it's been a bit of a game changer for us is we don't just focus on criteria for success, but we also focus on what is the criteria for failure, right? And I'm using failure in probably a harsh manner, but maybe to rephrase that, I would say, what is the criteria upon which you will decide not to continue, right, this particular project? And we I think that has changed the mindset, because as developers, as creators, we are rightly so in the habit of falling in love with our work, right? The model I create is the best model ever. Rarely will you see data scientists agree on something, right?
Right.
Now, I think that's where forcing this thought process and mindset has really helped us. Because I think you can love your work all you want, but it also forces you to think critically about and realistically and practically about whether this makes sense or not, right from the get-go. So we have had times when people have called projects off very early stages, in very early stages, simply because they were true to this kind of a mindset. While I don't think it's an easy thing to do, but I think it has been really helpful for us. And then broadly speaking, I think everything else in terms of ownership and all of that is really helps drive a lot of this, right? And again, I can't stress upon like what I would call coordination tax. So that's where we shy away from large teams, even if we're talking about big products, creating huge scale products, right? At no one point do we need, this is the whole, from my time in Amazon, we used to call them pizza teams, right? Like
Right.
no more than three, four, maximum five people, right? Who need to be a part of a team. If you have more than that, they're just there to attend a meeting, right? So that's one thing which my team does really well. They join a meeting. If they're more than five people, they're like, "Hey, what do I do?" And then let's get clear on roles, responsibilities, because realistically, very little that you need to do requires so many
Mhm.
people, right? And then you start wasting time in communication and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of things that Amazon did right, especially in the early days. I'll hold
Yeah.
the later phases of growth to different consideration here, but at least in those areas of high growth and high scale, that one pizza team or whatever it is really valuable. So final rapid question here is just a tip. So you've given a lot of great advice here, a lot of great insights. This is fantastic, and I bet you didn't realize how much in common a lot of this feedback really is. So if you can
Yeah.
give one piece of advice to perhaps either a founder or a small team group leader who's managing that small team and really wants to deliver that skill, maybe what's another final piece of tip or advice you'd want to share?
I think, first of all, it's been a pleasure, Ron. Great questions. Secondly, I think for me, the main thing has been, or the main game changer has been thinking in terms of systems versus not, right? I think that's also a bit of a practitioner mindset that requires some amount of transformation. But it's critical. If you can't systemize it, you have to really question whether you're doing the right thing, right? If you can't see a path to systemification, then it's probably not worth doing, right? Broadly, maybe there are exceptions, but systems, I think, is the key to scaling. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Systems, For sure. Well, Shashank, I want to thank you so much. You gave us a lot of great insights. Any follow-ups, any places people can follow you, or any additional places that people can continue this conversation if they're interested in continuing the conversation with you?
Not really, but you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to get on a call or have a conversation.
So great. So as I always end these podcasts with a final mantra for everybody. And for this episode, you heard it here, systematize things, really think about governance, think about the things, think about the constraints, and think about the rules of failure, not just the rules of success. Don't fall in love with your product. Don't fall in love with your solution. There might be a better way. There might be a better way to use your time. And of course, always focus on the value. There's so many little nuggets here. I want you to remind you all, if you loved this interview with Shashank Kadetotad, I want you to subscribe right now to this podcast. I want you to leave a review and share it with that small team leader friend who's still out there grinding, wondering how to make things work. If Shashank can do it with a 12-person team within that big organization, you can too. So I want you to think big, stay lean, and scale smarter. Small teams that scale big aren't the future, they're the now. If this episode has you inspired to learn more, hit that subscribe button, share it with your crew, and join the movement over at scalebrate.com. That's SCALEBRATE.com. Until next time, think big, stay lean, and scale smarter, because small teams have mega potential. And thanks for tuning in to the Small Team, Big Scale podcast.